the whole computer science and IT industry developed out of engineering. So engineers have always been at the heart of this kind of technical thinking. And so today, I can honestly speak from me working with my business partners, the engineers. We're looking at solutions, obviously nowadays mostly in the digital world, that help make their life easier, that help make the manufacturing processes easier and more controllable. So the world is changing. I mean, we're not just using a wrench anymore. We're using digital tools to drive our processes.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Industrial Visionaries, the podcast. Today, I'm speaking to Michael Backhaus. He is a director of digital manufacturing at Takeda. Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sergeant. Great to be here.
Glad to be talking to you. I wanted to start off with a sort of introduction for the audience. What's your background and how did you end up being the director of digital manufacturing at a pharmaceutical company?
Okay, quite a big question to start with. So it's a bit of a journey, of course. My background is a computer scientist. So I did study computer science back in Germany, had my career path going through science, working in science on different institutes, and then going into software development, working for a healthcare software company, and then eventually came to the pharmaceutical domain. And since then, well, that's where I am for 11 plus years now. Have had as you say, classically, a career with increasing responsibilities. And at the moment, I'm leading a team that is business partnering with the engineering organization in Takeda, and we provide IT solutions to drive business needs across our manufacturing network.
And when you say the engineering side of the organization, do you mean IT engineering or OT engineering, or are you with the company in a place where this is a mixed?
So I'm in a team called Data, Digital, and Technology. It's like the fancy new name for IT, formerly known as IT, and we provide IT services for other business partners across the organization. In my case, engineering, so the engineering teams kind of like being the functional business owners of certain areas like equipment management or product serialization, etc. And we do provide the technical solutions support as kind of like the technical system owners.
Okay, good to know. And then Takeda being a pharmaceutical company should probably influence a lot of how you deliver digital solutions. For one, when you look at GXP and then in particular GMP, so the manufacturing processes of pharmaceutical products, you probably deliver software and solutions differently than peers that, for example, produce windows or building materials. Can you dive a bit into what is different from your perspective?
Sure. So for everyone who is not completely familiar with pharmaceutical manufacturing, is typically producing things like what the end product is, like a medicine that is then used by patients for specific diseases or conditions. And Takeda itself produces quite complex medicines as such. So it's not just the regular tablets that is just stamped and off you go. They're quite complex biological processes happening in the manufacturing plants. And as such, it is quite complex from end to end. And we need to keep things under control, safety, quality, everything plays a role to ensure that there's consistency, reliability in the product, and that they meet the specifications of, at the end of the day, what helps the patients, right? So manufacturing is very complex in pharmaceuticals, and as such, then IT applications that support this manufacturing have to undergo specific quality criteria as well. Now, that's what you call GXP, the good manufacturing processes or practices. Not everything is that critical. There are products related directly to the manufacturing, to the product that's coming out for the patient, but there are also processes supportive of that. So, for example, cleaning of rooms, etc., is different than the actual product flowing through filtration and such. And so there are different levels of complexity and quality requirements that also software needs to support. My team, together with other teams like the business owners and quality and validation, are making sure that we meet those requirements and that everything is always in a high state of maintenance to support this manufacturing.
And so there's also a lot of reporting requirements because of this compliance framework. Did that force you to adopt Industry 4.0 faster, or did it hold you back because it was harder to adopt digital solutions in this environment?
Very good question. So Industry 4.0 is traditionally the digitization of previous workflows that often were labor intensive or manual, and we would move things to the digital world or have some digital companions to help subsidize human work, make things easier. From my perspective, make things easier, really. And there are a lot of other value drivers here as well, but it's the introduction of digital into the manual world. Now, with that complexity of pharmaceutical manufacturing, you're not always as quick as, say, in automotive manufacturing. So we're probably a little bit slower because it does take longer. But again, you have to keep in mind it is for the safety of patients. Why we do these things, why they maybe take a little bit longer. But on the other hand, once something is in place, it may take a while to get it there, but then it'll be there. So it's stable. It's something you need to support for a while. So there are quite a lot of considerations to be done. It's not just quick and dirty. It's certainly not.
Yeah. So you try to go as fast as you can, but as slow as you must.
And that's how you could say it. True.
Okay. And when you're adopting new solutions, what is your approach, and how do you, as a director, structure your team to properly adopt software?
So a solution always has to meet a demand and a value that is being generated by implementing that solution. So what we typically do is we don't just grab the first nice thing from the shelf and say, hey, how about this? I have a solution with the problem. But we go the other way around. So Takeda has a manufacturing network of 25 plus manufacturing sites. And as such, there is a lot of different demand across the network, and every site has, I would say, their individual maturity level of where they are in that digital journey. So the challenge is to capture that demand across the network, see, okay, what is really needed, what is the highest priority at this point in time, and what is going to move the needle in terms of value generating across the network, so that we then identify those areas where we say, okay, that's the focus area now. Like, let's say we recently had a program called paperless transformation, and that is everything that is not yet in a digital system already, but still paper-based operations on the shop floor. How can we digitize that? So over time, this demand comes up, we collect the demand and then start searching for digital solutions that may address that, and then need to develop the program to roll this out in a, as we said, GXP compliant manner across the network, 25 manufacturing sites. So it is quite a journey.
And so there's this project to go paperless. That's probably a nice example to just riff a bit on. Is it possible for any engineer to then, for example, adopt Node-RED because it can extract data from humans with forms and then put it in a database? Or would you say that goes top down and you need to be approved as an open source vendor first and an open source product before it can be adopted? So in a way, like, to what extent is this top down? Is adoption mandated, or is it bottom up with innovation?
Also a good question, because the answer is multifaceted. So we do have some programs which do come top down, and one of the examples would be paperless validation, something we did a few years ago. So validation in the realms of GXP compliance is mandatory. It's a critical aspect in pharmaceutical manufacturing. So validation is everywhere. And validation used to be paper-based until a while ago, until we did implement that digital system, which now allows all manufacturers at all functions to do that in a digital form. Now, that was a top-down approach. So we identified our solution for the network, and then it became a must-do for every manufacturing site to implement that within a relatively short given time. Now, it's not always like that. So again, what I mentioned with the maturity of each individual manufacturing site, some are further, some are less. And so we do have a portfolio of IT solutions for which some of them are perhaps for the more advanced manufacturing sites. And then it's more like a pull system. So they are ready to go for that particular solution, and then they can adopt to implement it, but it's not forced. So those are the two extremes. And then there's another one. So the paperless transformation we talked about, it is also a kind of self-service application. So it's implemented in a GXP compliant way, but it is addressing that sweet spot of sites wanting to move digital with what is still paper-based. And sites can do it at their own speed and at their own priority. And it's just incredible to see how that is taking off across the network, how sites are just exploding and implementing new forms, and then you see the utilization of these forms, and it's all done by site SMEs themselves in a regulated system, of course, but at the speed and pace that is applicable to that particular site. And some are faster, some are slower, but overall, it's really great to see that digital adoption across the network.
Yeah, I bet. And can you speed up that adoption by like normalizing, for example, data architectures? Or are there other frameworks that every site must follow to enable them to adopt faster when there's a central solution being purchased?
So Takeda is running a lot of solutions under the realms of as local as possible, as global as needed. IT software obviously more falling into the global category, so it's something we want to harmonize globally. But then there are a lot of country and site-specific differences that make things inherently different. So forms, electronic forms, paper-based forms are typically different between different sites. So we do not standardize that. Now, but what happens is you have a lot of IT systems at the end of the day across the manufacturing network supporting manufacturing operations, and we do want to use that data for driving additional value to support manufacturing operations like one-day batch release, etc. So that data is being centralized in a what you call data lake. So and there you need a certain structure. I mean, everything needs to fit into that box. So there's some harmonization ongoing, but some things are also left at the sites to do at their own.
And so enforcement of those things is also geography bound. So if you keep it local site bound, you have much more freedom. And as soon as the bits leave the manufacturing site, there's like a transformation going on before it hits the data lake.
Yeah, and also to feed back again to other processes at the manufacturing site. So you may have manufacturing processes, data collection coming from a certain system like batch record systems, but then that data is supposed to be used for analysis down the road. And those analytical applications, it needs to be harmonized in a certain way.
Got it. All right, makes sense. And so over the past couple of years, you've done a couple of projects, I assume, where the ROI must be wildly different. Can you dive a bit in like what the most successful ROI-friendly project was when you're digitalizing your operations? And then also, is ROI, like the dollar way of measuring output, is that the best way to measure projects?
Tough question, because it's probably a multifaceted answer. Now, we are running a business, so as such, ROI is important. There has to be some value in implementing a solution. Now, sometimes IT solutions can be enablers to other values that may not be realized as part of that particular program, but which are critical down the road or down the manufacturing process. So sometimes it's hard to say. I think the fundamentals in manufacturing nowadays are trying to get a sensible approach to digitize as much as possible about the manufacturing process, to then have that data available for analytics and eventually maybe even for this kind of fully automated and integrated manufacturing operations that we strive for. That may be many years down the road until we actually get there, but you want to get there somehow, and that means you need to start somehow, and there is no right or wrong how to start it, but you need to start it. Not everything may always have the ultimate value. Now, things are value driven, so we do look critically into the projects and what are the investment, what's the complexity, what's the value we get out of it. So it's a fine balance that we estimate every year and every project.
And so with some compliance frameworks, for example, the Cyber Resiliency Act being in effect like a year from now, there's a clear penalty, like up to X% of your global revenue. Would that be considered ROI for you folks? Or is that like meeting it might save you a fine, but it doesn't feel like it's an easy ROI calculation to make on what the probability is to prevent certain breaches of compliance. So how is it, like compliance first and then ROI, or like literally how do you balance this?
Okay, good question. Compliance is compliance, and compliance must be done. So compliance projects are prioritized in the annual budget discussions. And while there is an ROI, it's probably not being looked at as a primary driver in that case. So that compliance must be done, and particularly in pharma. That's just inherent to the business. But there are many other ways which still have to be GXP compliant. So meaning an IT solution that supports manufacturing, like the before mentioned paperless transformations, so there are GDP compliant forms. In that sense, the compliance is how do we capture data and how does it represent the manufacturing process, the accuracy, etc. But it's not the actual process itself that needs to be compliant or that puts us into breach. The breach would be if it's incompliant, of course. But here really it's the ROI that drives the identification of the solution and the rollout method.
Okay, that makes sense. And then if you're rolling out a digital solution in some OT teams, you might have some resistance to roll those out. Things used to work before, so like why change? How do you ensure that they eventually embrace the new way of doing manufacturing?
That's really not as hard as it may sound. So again, it goes back to capturing demand from the network and then leveraging that, capturing enough across the network before we say, okay, yeah, that's big enough. The demand is big enough, so let's focus on that. So by that time, it will not be just a single side with a single small problem. Then we'll tell everybody else, hey, you have to do the same thing. No, I mean, it is only a business problem that multiple sides will have. And quite frankly, if you have someone on the shop floor dealing with certain issues on a regular basis, they will be happy about having a solution that makes their life easier. It may make their life easier in the execution of the particular task. It may make life easier in the evaluation of the quality of those executions, et cetera, et cetera. So it really makes life easier. So we do not have that problem of adoption, I would say.
Okay. Interesting, because we sometimes see some holdout engineers that now are forced to help out with digitalization and be a digital native engineer as well as, for example, electrical engineering as well. And they just don't have the tools yet in the toolbox. And now they feel they're being replaced personally, although it's just a process that changes.
I would challenge that. I mean, the whole computer science and IT industry developed out of engineering. So engineers have always been at the heart of this kind of technical thinking. And so today, I can honestly speak from me working with my business partners, the engineers, we're looking at solutions, obviously nowadays mostly in the digital world, that help make their life easier, that help make the manufacturing processes easier and more controllable. So the world is changing. I mean, we're not just using a wrench anymore. We're using digital tools to drive our processes.
Okay. Although you could say that computer science is applied mathematics, where engineering, like actual engineering, is applied physics. So there is still a gap in my mind. And in our case, I think it's mostly a training gap. And to ensure that everyone feels like you are not being replaced, the process is being updated to modern standards for indeed what you said as well, these business reasons and this business demand.
I would agree. And then in addition, it's oftentimes the people with the functional knowledge of how a certain domain is working and having that insight, and then applying that to the IT world and making sure, okay, whatever we implement as an IT solution does really meet the functional needs. So bridging that gap, it's not the pure software development where you may need a coder who really goes deep and it's just developing the whole day, but it's bridging the gap between functional requirements and IT capabilities, where people can be from both sides, and having an exchange between the engineers and the IT guys and switching sides is actually quite favorable.
Yeah, fair enough. And then I guess already the final question before we start wrapping up. But like in terms of digital, like data visualization and interaction with that data, have you folks been able to ensure that also operators can interact and update the software and the data visualizations that they themselves use?
That is happening all the time and across the network. So you probably won't be able to catch up with all of that. But the reality is people do use it on a regular basis, and people get involved with that. And it's an opportunity to work with data to make it accessible. So the dashboarding solutions that are around nowadays are really not that difficult to use. It doesn't require heavy programming. It's kind of like low code, so to speak. Yep. So it's very common, and you will see this kind of digital upskilling across the network and people using these solutions. So that's a nice example. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. And then based on what you've seen so far in your career, can you maybe make a bold prediction on the future of manufacturing and is there something people aren't ready for?
It's something that I mentioned before. It's that fully autonomous manufacturing from end to end. That would be something we're striving for. That's what we want as engineers and as IT guys, to basically have as little human interaction as possible, which is, by the way, good for the safety of the process and the products, but inherently also difficult to manage, particularly in optical processes. And we've seen that as an example from the automotive domain. They've taken a step back and said, okay, fully automation may not actually work, so humans are still needed. I think that is probably true for a while to come, but that's what we're striving for. And again, because of the compliance aspects in pharmaceutical manufacturing, it's quite an interesting one when we see that machines will be self-regulating. So you see, for example, the temperature going up, and you see an algorithm defining, okay, I need to do this and that, I have to bring the temperature back down or stay within the limits of the product, and then having that feedback loop to the machines on the shop floor. That will be coming, but it'll be an interesting journey. Yeah?
And so you get dark factories, except for the engineer that does the data acquisition and the maintenance of both the machine as well as of the data infrastructure.
Yeah, but if you want to go so far, I mean, that engineer may be sitting at home and the object going on the shop floor doing the maintenance, that may be a robot.
Yeah, exactly. Like they wouldn't turn the lights on. So it would remain a dark factory, and you might have a handful of engineers in one site worldwide managing multiple sites.
That's cool. Yeah.
And at what stage do we just remove half of those sites?
Oh, probably never. At least I can say for the processes that we have and the products that we do produce. Again, these biological processes are so difficult. It still takes time to switch, for example, from one product to the next, or sometimes their manufacturing lines particularly build around one specific product. So that will stay like that for foreseeable future.
So lights will be installed in the factory for building a line, for changing lines, and then maybe for maintenance, but that's a maybe. And otherwise, lights will just idle.
Yeah, and maybe we can even automate that part at some point. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'll be interested to see. I hope I'm still around.
Yeah, I think progress is going much faster than like the last decade than the decade before, and I don't see the pace slowing down. So I suspect we'll be around. Either way, that's all we got time for today. So I do want to thank you for joining. Before we wrap up, I've seen you've been quite visible on social media. Is that the best way to follow your investigations and progress?
Sure, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the platform I'm on. So feel free to exchange. Always there.
All right. Well, amazing. Thanks for the fun conversation. I learned a bunch. We'll keep in touch. And yeah, thanks again for joining.
Thanks for the invitation, and talk soon.